NHS and Public Health England and local authorities who have to play their part to plan for a seamless transition from the trial to routine commissioning from April next year.
Coyle.
The Secretary of State gave a personal commitment that the PrEP trial be extended. He has failed to meet that commitment, and men have contracted HIV as a direct result of the government's failure. So what faith can the people who need PrEP and organisations like Terence Higgins Trust and the NHS and councils have that the government's national programme will be ready and able to meet the demand that exists?
Mr. Speaker, this is a really important issue, and I care very much about getting this rollout right. And so I would just slightly chastise the honourable gentleman for his tone, because the Minister met the Terence Higgins Trust yesterday. They agree with the approach that we're taking, because the rollout from a trial to routine commissioning will happen in April. Now, there are some gaps where local authorities need to do more, but there are thousands more places available on the trial from the NHS perspective. So if he feels strongly about this, as I do, he should be working with us to get local authorities to do their part, because the NHS is doing its part.
Yeah. Congratulate the Secretary of State on setting the 2030 target on HIV infections. Access to PrEP, but also, critically, healthcare professional time is vital for reducing new infections. Does he therefore agree with me and the Trust that we must do everything to remove the funding and the logistic obstacles that are discouraging clinics from filling the many places that are now available on that trial?
Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my right honourable friend, who is absolutely spot on about this. And it's broader. Yesterday, there is further that we need to do in terms of ensuring that health inequalities of people who are homosexual or LGBT across the board need to be reduced. We've got a whole plan to make that happen. She played an important part in it in government, and I will rest at nothing to make sure that we address these problems, but we shouldn't engage in the sort of...
Darren Hodgson, immensely grateful for the right honourable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear what the Secretary of State has said, but data from the British Association for Sexual Health and HIV has shown that 9 gay and bisexual men in Greater Manchester were diagnosed with HIV whilst waiting to access the PrEP trial. Now, this is likely to be just the tip of the iceberg, and the number of people who have acquired HIV because they could not access the trial. So he will agree that this is totally unacceptable and goes against the government's own commitment to eradicate HIV by 2030. So does the Minister agree with me that PrEP should be routinely commissioned before the trial ends in September 2020, and will he commit now that this will happen?
We are switching to routine commissioning from April. It is a deep frustration of mine that some local authorities are not putting in place the measures they need to put in place. I'll look into Manchester in particular. I didn't know about that example. I personally set the goal of 2030 being HIV-free by 2030. I'm delighted, along with support from the member for Portsmouth when she was the Minister for Equalities. I'm delighted that we have made the progress that we have. I have absolutely no doubt that there is further road to travel on this, and we should all come together in support of equalities in health provision, especially in this area, and I look forward to working with her and all those who are on the side of trying to make this change happen.
Tommy Shepherd.
I'll find words.
Where is young Shepherd? He's withdrawn. I wasn't advised of that. Never mind. He's a most active beaver in the chamber in normal circumstances, so it doesn't matter that he's not here because Mr. Andrew Rosendale is.
Question 13, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, speak for Romford. Well done. Minister.
Everyone now has easier and more convenient access to GP services, including appointments in the evenings and at weekends. There are also substantial improvement programmes in place related to 7-day hospital services set out in the NHS long-term plan, including that hospitals with major A&E departments will provide same-day emergency care services 12 hours a day, 7 days a week by the end of 2019-20.
I thank the Minister for her reply, but I'm increasingly concerned that my constituents in Romford are often having to wait 3 weeks or even longer for routine appointments with their GP. So what action is the government taking to ensure that such long waiting times are reduced and preferably eliminated altogether?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. Just over 40% of all appointments take place on the same day with GPs and when they are booked. However, it is important to recognise that many patients will be appropriately booking ahead as part of the ongoing plan for long-term conditions. The new GP contract will see billions of extra investment for improved access to GPs, expanded services at local practices and longer appointments for patients who need them. NHS England is working with stakeholders and is undertaking a national review of access to general practice services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But more than 5 million people across England are unable to book an appointment with a GP outside of working hours. Many of our constituents have had to wait 2-3 weeks in order to get an appointment. And with a loss of 1,600 full-time GPs since 2015 and billions of cuts since 2010, does the Minister realise that the NHS is certainly not safe with the Conservative Party, and that's what the British people think?
Minister Dorey.
I simply do not recognise the scenario that the Honourable Lady just articulated. There is access across GP practices throughout England outside of working hours.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to ask my neighbour, the Minister, a question. In the efforts to get more work through a 7-day NHS, will this mean an extra effort to improve the take-up for the flu vaccine this year, not least for those suffering from lung disease like CPD and asthma? Because last year, about 50% of them didn't get the opportunity or didn't take up the opportunity. So will that be improved this year? What steps is the government taking to make sure that they and those who support them get the necessary flu vaccine this year?
Well, it's a delight to take a question in my first health orals from my right honourable friend and my neighbour. And could I just make a suggestion while I'm here, that if he'd like to pop into Shefford Pharmacy, I'm sure Jamil will give him a flu vaccine as he walks in through the door, because Jamil does not require anybody to wait. Anyone can have a flu vaccine who wants to. Think pharmacy first. Yeah. But we're also ahead on pensioner vaccines, flu vaccines, than we were last year. It's crucial that those who are at risk groups, as he articulated, are vaccinated first and protect themselves this winter. And we're targeting patients throughout the Help Us, Help You campaign, which highlights the impacts of flu on the most at risk. But we are ahead of our targets on last year.
We're running late, but I'll take a one-sentence question from Gareth Thomas.
The 3 walk-in centres that provide a 7-day-a-week service in my constituency are closed or closing. Why?
Minister.
I didn't get the question in full, but I'm happy to meet with him afterwards and talk about that in more detail in the specific areas he talked about.
Order. Topical questions. Kelvin Hopkins.
Topical number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, since the last health oral questions, we've announced 20 hospital upgrades, 40 new hospitals, 200 million for cancer diagnosis kit, 250 million NHSX AI lab, a social prescribing academy, as mentioned by my right honourable friend, the launch of Every Mind Matters public mental health campaign, a landmark agreement so cystic fibrosis drugs, including Orkambi, can be available on the NHS, and the firm commitment from the Prime Minister that in any trade talks after Brexit, the NHS is and always will be off the table.
Speaker, in England in 2017-18, there were 1.2 million hospital admissions related to alcohol consumption, 3% up on the previous year. Hospital admissions due to alcohol liver disease have increased by 43% in the last 10 years, and alcohol problems now cost the NHS an estimated £3.5 billion every year in England alone. Why has the government not properly recognised the enormous and growing scale of the country's alcohol-related health problems and failed to bring forward serious and effective measures to address them?
Well, the Prevention Green Paper that we published in the summer specifically addresses what is needed. I think that the effort that we put into supporting those who are hospitalised through their abuse of alcohol needs to be enhanced, and we have enormous amounts of effort underway to make that happen.
David Everett.
Mr. Speaker, does my honourable friend the Minister agree with me that the latest data on the soft drinks industry levy is both encouraging and positive in the campaign to improve the health, particularly of the young?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for putting it so eloquently, and it just shows what can be achieved. We have seen great results through the soft drinks industry levy. Average sugar content of drinks subject to the levy has decreased by 28.8% between 2015 and 18. Significant investments have therefore been able to be made in our schools' activity and healthy eating.
Mr. Speaker, as it's the last time we will have health questions with you in the chair, I want to thank you for being a fantastic speaker, and particularly your support for backbenchers and making sure we can be heard through urgent questions. Last week we found that the number of people receiving publicly funded social care has fallen by 15,000 in the last year. We know that 95 people a day die while waiting for care, and that cuts of £7.7 billion have been made from social care budgets since 2010. Older and disabled people are paying the price. Labour has set out our plans to deliver free personal care for people over 65 who need it. We're providing dignity in old age. When will the Secretary of State give people the dignity and care they deserve and bring forward their plans for social care?
Minister Dining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware that the Queen's speech last week, the week before, announced that there will be a bill to tackle the cost of adult social care. And the Honourable Lady will also know that the Prime Minister said on the steps of Downing Street that the government will set out plans to fix the crisis in social care once and for all. We need to get through Brexit, and the party opposite need to vote for the methods that will help us deliver that, because then we can ensure... Because then we can get on to the things in life which really matter, like ensuring that no one will ever have to pay for their home to pay for their care.
Clean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for Health very much for agreeing to increase the amount awarded to the ALEX to begin essential improvement works that the whole community in Redditch has been campaigning for a very, very long time. Can he tell my constituents when we will finally see shovels in the ground?
We'll see shovels in the ground, I very much hope, from next year. And I just want to pay tribute to my honourable friend who has campaigned endlessly for these improvements to the hospital in Redditch. There is no better supporter of Redditch than my honourable friend, and she has badgered me endlessly, met me formally, bumped into me and campaigned. Every time I see her, she says, can we have the improvement to the hospital? And the answer is yes.
To Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says that the NHS is not on the table, but President Trump and his trade officials have been very clear that they will seek to more than double drug prices, driving up the bill from $18 billion to $45 billion a year. What discussions is he having, and does he accept this is why devolved governments must have input in trade deals?
The NHS is not on the table in any trade deal. Medicine pricing and drugs pricing is not on the table in a trade deal. And if I just bring the Honourable Lady's attention to this quotation, the former US Trade General Counsel Stephen Vaughan said, "If the UK really is determined to make no changes at all on pharmaceuticals, they can absolutely hold that position. That doesn't have anything to do with us." Quite right, we do hold that position. They're off the table.
Mark Menzies.
Can I welcome the announcement of Royal Preston Hospital being included in the hospital upgrades programme? But can the Minister tell me what plans he has for Blackpool Victoria Hospital, where services such as ophthalmics are now over capacity and could do with some additional investment?
Minister Arger.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. As members of the House will know, he spoke just last week about his local hospital in Blackpool and the challenges it faces. It is absolutely clear we need to not only get leadership right there, but continue to invest in it, and I believe I'm already meeting him to discuss exactly that.
Jim Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With your indulgence, can I follow on from our front bench and say you have been a fantastic speaker? You and I first got together as Trade and Industry Select Committee about 20 years ago, and I do recall, before you became Speaker, also suggesting to you that you might want to stand for Speaker. I bet you forgot that one.
You're to blame.
No, I'm not to blame. Anyway, I think I wish you and your family all the best for the future. You've always been very fair and very helpful to me, and I think you'll be missed in this chamber, despite what your opponents have got to say. Can I come on to more serious matters now? We were promised by the previous Chancellor that the doctors' pensions tax would be sorted out. He said he was in negotiations. Repeatedly this has been raised. Nothing has happened so far. Doctors are not putting in overtime. Patients are suffering. The NHS could be in meltdown this winter. What are you going to do about it?
Getting this right is incredibly important, and the change in the guidance last month allows every single NHS trust to introduce the flexibilities immediately to ensure that doctors can do the work and do the overtime they need, make sure that they get paid properly for that, and that they don't get penalised through the impact on the pension system. That change came in at the start of last month, and I will write to him with the details of it so that he can tell all doctors that these flexibilities are available so they can do the work that they need to.
Earlier this year, the Secretary of State spoke about the importance of introducing new financing mechanisms to develop and deploy drugs and vaccines to tackle antimicrobial resistance. I wondered if he could update us on that, please.
Good question. Yes, it was with my honourable friend's support. We launched in January the 5-year plan to tackle antimicrobial resistance. We've now taken that to a global level. This is a global problem. And we've appointed Dame Sally Davies, who's recently stood down as the Chief Medical Officer, to be our AMR czar so that she can continue the drive both domestically and around the world.
Grogan. Why, under a Conservative government, was Airedale's Hospital's £22 million bid for renewal of the ward block turned down? And isn't it time the government adopted the suggestion of NHS providers for a larger, multi-year capital programme for the NHS with decisions based on need?
Minister Arger. I know that the honourable gentleman will be pleased that that is exactly what we have done with the HIP plan, multi-year capital funding, settlements, investment in our hospitals. In respect of his specific example, I'm very happy to discuss that with him separately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are over 1.5 million people in Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, and they have no access to a radiotherapy facility in either county. Will the Minister agree to bring cancer care closer to people's homes and establish a satellite radiotherapy unit in Stevenage and join the campaign?
Minister. My honourable friend is a strong local champion for his constituents in Stevenage, particularly on this issue, in which I know he's joined by the right honourable gentleman sitting next to him. He's absolutely right to highlight the importance of easy access and geographical access to such facilities. I'm very happy to meet with him and my right honourable friend sitting next to him to discuss it.
Imran Hussain. Mr. Speaker, after almost a decade of ideological Tory austerity and underfunding of our NHS, A&E waiting times at the Bradford Royal Infirmary have soared, with 1 in 4 patients admitted last winter waiting longer than the 4-hour target. Patients in Bradford deserve better than being left to suffer in A&E departments and in the back of ambulances. Will the Minister meet with me to discuss emergency funding for Bradford NHS services to avoid another winter crisis?
Minister. We are putting record amounts of funding into the NHS, not only across the country, but in Bradford. And if the people of Bradford get their election, and if those on that side vote for it, if the people of Bradford want to know what is the best thing to do in that election to support the long-term investment in the NHS, it's to make sure they support the only true party of the NHS, the Conservative.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I note the recent announcement of the rollout of the electronic prescription service. Can I ask my right honourable friend how this will benefit my constituents, when it will be rolled out, and how my constituents can use it to support their local community pharmacy?
Preferably in a sentence. Joe Churchill.
So, digitising it by using electronic prescribing, it will save the National Health Service up to £300 million, freeing up vital time for GP and pharmacists to spend with their patients. It will start on November the 19th.
Splendid. Thank you very much. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, the government has finally completed its consultation on mandatory fortification of flour with folic acid. So when can we finally expect to see this eminently sensible policy implemented?
Minister.
This was part of the Prevention Green Paper. We have now got the consultation responses back in, and we will be assessing those and coming forward with proposals in future.
Caroline Noakes.
Mr.
Speaker, there is still too much reliance on BMI as an indicator of good health in sufferers from eating disorders. Will my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, get behind the Dump the Scales campaign and meet with the indomitable campaigner Hope Virgo to make sure that GPs realise there is more to eating disorders than just weight?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for her question. Actually, the NICE guidelines do state very clearly that GPs should not use BMI as a sole indicator for treatment. And I have actually just met with the eating disorder charity BEAT to discuss how we approach eating disorders going forward. But what I would say is, out of the £2.3 billion that we have invested into mental health service, we have made a commitment to see any young person presenting with an acute eating disorder within 1 week and others within 4 weeks.
The right to challenge decisions about care and support is fundamental, and the system to do this must be fair and consistent across all local authorities. Will the Secretary of State make it his policy to introduce a statutory social care appeals process for decisions made about an individual's care and support?
This, of course, is an incredibly important matter. It was addressed in the Care Act of 2014, and I'm very happy to look at any proposals that are brought forward, because it is important that we get fair treatment right.
With the joint select committees, local government and health select committees, that the best way to fund the future
I think that the joint reports were excellent.
Jardine.
Mr. Speaker, Cadre will on Friday begin a hunger strike because she still cannot get cannabis oil on an NHS prescription, despite the fact that since her son started using it, he's had no seizures. It's costing the family £1,300 a month. When will the Secretary of State commit to making this available to the people he promised?
Well, as we discussed in the answer to the earlier question, I have both made this decriminalise the use of cannabis oil. We've introduced the NIHR clinical trials, but of course the individual rules around prescriptions have to be for individual clinicians. And when it comes to funding it in Scotland, that is a matter for the Scottish NHS.
Thank you. Mr. David Tredynick.
Look at making greater use of chiropractors and osteopaths in support of orthopaedic surgeons.
How could I say no, since my wife was an osteopath, and I understand very, very strongly the importance and the value of those professions.
Sweeney. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Royal College of Surgeons reports today that 61% of consultant surgeons have been told to not take up waiting list time reduction initiatives over winter because of the NHS tax trap. So will the Minister please engage with the Treasury and appeal to them to sort this out before waiting lists are exacerbated over the winter months?
I am, of course, engaged with the Treasury on this, but what I'd also say is these flexibilities are available right across the country and they must be used by trusts.
We're all grateful to the National Health Service, but I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has spoken movingly of the particular debt of gratitude that he owes to the institution. Mr. James Brokenshire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to echo that again in the context that next month, November, is Lung Cancer Awareness Month. And I would ask my right honourable friend to commend the Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation and all those who are highlighting the signs of this disease to prevent people, saving lives quite literally because of the need for early diagnosis. Can he update the House equally on the lung health check programme, targeted screening that could quite literally save lives against this terrible, terrible disease?
Minister Churchill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, along with my right honourable friend, would like to pay tribute to the Roy Castle Foundation, but also to all those charities who work in the cancer space, who do the most tremendous work on awareness raising, because it is only by awareness raising that we can actually get earlier diagnosis and beat this disease. We are looking very seriously at what you suggest.
Committees over your time in the chair. After a long period of engagement with patients, staff and partner organisations, the NHS has come up with a clear set of recommendations to government and to Parliament for the legislative reforms it needs. I hope all political parties are listening to that, but would the Secretary of State confirm that he will accept all their recommendations, including the ones that recommend scrapping of Section 75 of the Health and Social Care Act and other provisions that will end wasteful collecting rounds in the NHS?
Well, I want to tribute to the Honourable Lady for the work that she and her committee, who of course will scrutinise it further, is an important step forward. And I'm delighted that Her Majesty committed in the legislation on the NHS, of which these proposals will be.
Hazelmere and my constituency busy minor injuries unit used by 8,000 people a year, which is currently threatened with closure. Given that that would be catastrophic for the town of Hazelmere, its vital facility.
Well, predecessor, my right honourable, is an assiduous campaigner for South West. Better spokesman for South West, than my right honourable friend. He has raised this issue with me in private over the recent weeks since these concerns were raised. I have in turn raised it with the Chief Executive of the NHS, and I can confirm that the walk-in centre will stay open.
I'm extremely grateful, Mr. Speaker. The primary care mental health service in York is not being cut, it's being scrapped. So will the Secretary of State urgently meet with me to save this service?
I'm happy to help and meet with the Honourable Lady to talk about no primary health, mental health services should be cutting with the amount of funding we're putting in, but I'm happy to meet and discuss it with her.
I must say to the honourable gentleman, hero in their eyes. Sir David Amis!
Does my right honourable friend share my concern that a highly paid health executive has been made redundant by Southend Clinical Commissioning Group, given £200,000 and then employed somewhere else in the organisation? Disgraceful.
Well, today's the first I've heard of this one, Mr. Speaker, and what I can tell my right honourable friend is that the NHS redundancy terms were capped at £160,000 in April 2015. We've consulted on bringing that down to £95,000. We've also introduced powers in primary legislation to claw back contractual redundancy payments where someone returns to any public sector job within 12 months. So I'll raise this individual case with the NHS to ensure taxpayers' money is being used as well as possible.
Thank you. Could the Secretary of State speak to his colleagues in the Home Office and get them to allow the Glasgow Health and Social Care Partnership to open a supervised drug consumption room in my constituency and get vulnerable people into a service which will keep them alive?
Minister.
So, we currently have no plans to change the laws on drug consumption rooms. We support a range of evidence-based approach to reduce the health-related harms associated with drug misuse. I'm keenly awaiting the summit in Glasgow, which will focus on tackling problem drug use and bring together the experts we need. Dame Carol Black's report is out in the next few weeks, but better resources into treatment and recovery is vital, and I would urge the government to invest.
Speaker, will the Secretary of State visit Wickham Hospital to discuss the future of our increasingly tired 1960s tower block?
I'm absolutely happy to look. We've put in place the health infrastructure plan for ensure there's a long-term plan for the replacement of ailing hospitals. That includes the ability to bring forward new proposals that weren't announced in the first round, and I'm very happy to visit and come to which is a beautiful town.
Well done.
Plans for both a new health centre in Maghull and a new walk-in centre at Southport have been repeatedly turned down by this government. Isn't the only way that my constituents and those of members across the House to get these new facilities that they so much need to elect a Labour government?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I was in Southport last month, and I saw the fantastic staff and what they do. I was able to talk to them about the improvements that we are planning in Southport. And the thing is this, what people in Southport know, and people across this country know, is that unless you have a strong economy, you can't fund a strong NHS. And the plans that the party opposite have got for the economy would sink our economy, and it's only with a strong Conservative government that you can have a properly funded NHS.
I say to the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Rayleigh, when we stood against each other in Conservative student politics in 1986, I was the candidate of the right and he was the candidate of the left. But some things change over the years. Mark Francois.
Mr. Speaker, you won. And can I say, although we have not always agreed on everything in the 18 years that I have been in this House, can I say most earnestly, from one midget to another, I wish you a long and happy retirement. Secretary of State, following to my right honourable friend's question, the individual he mentioned moved from being the accountable officer of the Southend CCG to the accountable officer of the Thurrock CCG. It was a sideways move for which he trousered £250,000 of public money that should have been spent on patients. Don't just cap the payment, sir. Make him pay it back.
Tell us what you're
Well, again, we have the powers in primary legislation to claw back contractual redundancy payments, and there is nobody who is more keen to ensure the careful expenditure of taxpayers' money than my honourable friend, and it has now been raised very significantly and very powerfully by the voices of Essex in this session.
I'm sorry, we've way overrun. Demand exceeds supply on these occasions, and by the way, that's true in the health service under governments of both colours. But we'll take one more. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very distressed to learn last week that Hull has a higher than average number of people having foot amputations, partly because of diabetic foot ulcers. This is despite the excellent work being done by the vascular department, but the message from that department is that they are underfunded and under-resourced and in desperate need of an infrastructure upgrade to their theatre. Time is running out, so instead of saying, will the Minister meet with me, will the Minister instead just act very quickly to give them the funding they need to stop unnecessary amputations happening in Hull? Yeah.
Well, we have the largest infrastructure investment programme in a generation, and I'm very happy to look at the specific requests from Hull to make sure that they get the infrastructure they need.
Thank you, colleagues. Order. Urgent question. Laura Pidcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if she will make a statement on their plans for workers' rights after the UK leaves the EU.
Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Secretary Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK has a long and proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights and for setting the highest standards. The government has been clear and consistent that the decision to leave the EU does not change that in any way whatsoever. The government has absolutely no intention of lowering standards on workers' rights. To suggest otherwise is scaremongering and is untrue. The EU traditionally has set minimum standards for workers' rights, and as all colleagues in this chamber would expect, the UK already exceeds standards in a wide range of areas, such as maternity and paternity leave and pay. The UK offers 39 weeks of statutory maternity pay compared with the 14 weeks of paid maternity leave required by the EU's minimum standards. And because this government believes in the importance of supporting families in every possible way, we've also given fathers and partners an additional statutory right to leave and pay, something that the EU is only now starting to consider. We're one of the few EU member states to have introduced shared parental leave, and we're proud that in the UK we've given all employees with 26 weeks qualifying service a statutory right to request flexible working that enables so many to better balance work and life responsibilities. EU law only allows workers to make such a request if returning from parental leave. So under the terms of the EU Withdrawal Act of 2018, all existing workers' rights laws will be transferred into domestic law once we've left the EU, making sure there is no gap or lack of clarity in the minimum set of workers' rights, which, as I've already said, is something the UK exceeds in many areas. We're also including in the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill a new requirement that every bill brought before this place in the future that affects workers' rights will include a statement by the government of the day on how it impacts on workers' rights, and this will ensure that Parliament always has its say. The government has also published clauses that will require every government, now and in the future, to monitor new EU legislation covering employment and workplace health and safety standards, and to report on those changes to Parliament, so that Parliament can again have its say. So, Mr. Speaker, in direct answer to the Honourable Lady's question, I can absolutely assure her and this House that the government will not lower standards on workers' rights when we leave the EU. On the contrary, it is the ambition of this government to make the United Kingdom the best place to work and to grow a business.
Thank you for granting this urgent question, Mr. Speaker. I persisted. The leaked memos, as reported in the Financial Times over the weekend, are both worrying and at the same time utterly predictable. They shine a light on the true politics of this Conservative government and how they are seeking to use the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, as with their whole Brexit strategy, to sell out workers. The Prime Minister may keep repeating that this is an excellent deal, and no doubt that will be the mantra come a general election, but I would like to get to the truth. I want to start by asking the Secretary of State about the status of these documents, and in particular ask which government departments they were distributed to and when, and ask at what stage she was aware of their existence and their content, and if she was not aware, why not? Because, Mr. Speaker, this is critical, given that last week the government gave a number of assurances on the issue to members in this House, while at the same time it seems that they were discussing the very opposite amongst themselves. They will use a Brexit as a blueprint for rapid deregulation, which will see the vital flaw on protections disappear. This government have proposed a Brexit deal that benefits their pals, the millionaires, the speculators and hedge fund managers over working people, and they can shout at me all they want, but this is the truth. How can we trust a Prime Minister that stood up and said they would keep, and I quote, the highest possible standards on workers' rights, yet the leaks show that the government views such commitments as, and I again quote, inappropriate, and that negotiators had successfully resisted them being included in the legally binding part of the agreement with the EU. These rights are not inappropriate. They are things like maternity leave, working hours, paid holiday leave, things that make a difference to people's lives. The Secretary of State says that the government does not intend to dilute rights after we leave the EU. Then can I ask her very simply, why did they take the level playing field obligations out of the legally binding part of the Brexit agreement? Crucially, has the Secretary of State's department or the Cabinet Office ever looked at deregulation, and why have they, if they have? Mr. Speaker, we need to get to the bottom of this. The government are relying on the complexity of this legislation to bury their true approach to workers' rights. Once we expose exactly the consequences of their approach to leaving the EU and what that means for our communities, they know that the government can never win the support of this House, and more importantly, can never win the support of working people. And what is needed is, rather than resisting workers' rights, a fundamental shift in power from the owners of business to workers, and it is only a Labour government that will ever do that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was incredibly disappointing. The Honourable Lady obviously wasn't listening to a thing I said. I'll just repeat what I actually said rather than what she asserts I said, if she will allow me. And that is what I said. It is this government's ambition to make the United Kingdom the best place in the world to work. And I find it extraordinary that the Honourable Lady thinks the only valid protector of the UK workers' rights can be the European Union. Why on earth does she think that her party, my party, the other opposition parties and our strong trades union tradition in the United Kingdom are utterly incapable of building on the superb tradition we already have in the United Kingdom of exceeding workers' rights in the EU in so many areas? Once we've left the European Union, The United Kingdom will not be represented in EU institutions, and nor will we have any direct influence on future EU legislation on workers' rights. Why then should the government and this Parliament seek to engineer circumstances where we are required to implement legislation over which we've had no say? As we leave the European Union, we have a unique opportunity to enhance protections for the workforce and tailor them to best support UK workers. It will be for the United Kingdom to create and enhance UK employment rights and to take advantage of the superb opportunities for new UK-wide skills, jobs and prosperity that awaits us after we've left the European Union.
Most eccentric behaviour by the honourable gentleman member for Hitchin and Harpenden. It isn't necessary to raise one's hand as though in a classroom. It's quite sufficient for the honourable gentleman simply to stand. I don't know what he did when he was at Eton, but he doesn't have to worry about that now. But anyway, I'm glad there's a beatific smile on the face of the honourable gentleman. That itself is a source of some solace. Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that this statement by the other side is completely at odds with reality. If they look very carefully, now wanting to remain in the EU, it is the judgments of the ECJ that Professor Mary Davis of Holloway, a Labour historian, has said would be a thunderclap to the left because they put business rights over workers' rights in imported workers. So if this case is exactly what they say it is, they should be wanting to accelerate our departure from the EU to get back full control of workers' rights to the UK.
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and he's done so much to promote social justice in the United Kingdom, and he deserves respect from all across this place. And what I would say to my right honourable friend is that one of the EU's own agencies, they obviously don't want to hear this because they're all chatting, Mr. Speaker, but one of the EU's own agencies, Eurofound, ranks the United Kingdom as the second best country in the EU for workplace well-being, second only to Sweden, and the best for workplace performance. Something to be proud of.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Secretary of State's energetic assertions, make no mistake, the Prime Minister's deal is disastrous for workers' rights. Scottish workers and industry now face the spectre of Tory trade deals to lower environmental and other vital standards. The Tories can never be trusted with workers' rights. Their record speaks for itself, and anyone who believes otherwise is sorely deluded. The Prime Minister bought off Labour votes for his awful deal by pledging the highest possible standards. Days later, that promise, like so many others, lay in tatters. The EU law and courts provide their own backstop against UK workers' rights being weakened. We know this government is planning to diverge on key regulations post-Brexit. Isn't it the case that the only way to guarantee workers' rights and avoid them being watered down is to stay in the EU? And as the SCVO pointed out, the loss of oversight from and recourse to the European Court of Justice will remove protection from citizens of the UK. As a minimum, will the Secretary of State at least agree to undertake an equality impact assessment of the UK Government plans for workers' rights post-Brexit? If not, why not?
Well, the honourable gentleman describes my defence of our ambitions on workers' rights as energetic. It also happens to be true, which is extremely helpful to workers in the United Kingdom. And let's just look at the facts, because he asserts that somehow the EU is the only thing that lies between us and the poorhouse. But in reality, there is no minimum wage in the EU, whereas this government is raising the national minimum wage to £10.50 an hour. UK annual holiday entitlement is 28 days, including our public holidays. In the EU, it's 20 days. Our maternity entitlements are nearly 3 times greater than in the EU. We've given fathers and partners statutory right to leave and pay. We've given adoption leave. We've given employees the rights to request flexible working. In every single area, the UK far exceeds the European Union. It's absolute rubbish, total rubbish, to say that the EU is the only protector of UK workers' rights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could we just turn to the practical for a moment? Most of our constituents are either in work, have worked, or are related to people in work. It would be a pretty eccentric and perverse prospectus to take to our voters to say, please vote for us, we are going to make your working life worse, your standards lower, and your environment less safe. In the practical, non-ideological politics which this side of the House reside in, would my right honourable friend agree with me that would be a very strange political message indeed?
Well, of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right. And just to give some further cheery news, 80% of jobs created since 2010 are full-time jobs. The introduction of the national living wage delivered the lowest earners' fastest pay rise in at least 20 years. The Honourable Lady might like to look at the facts rather than the rhetoric coming from the opposition benches. If you want to have good work, if you want to have good workers' rights, if you want to have decent wages, stick with the Conservatives.
Angela Eagle.
Speaker, but listening to the Conservative Party and asking them to be trusted is a bit like trusting Dracula with the blood bank. We know what their record is. Now, will the Right Honourable Lady talk about enforcement? Because you can have all the rights you like on paper, but this is a government, and its predecessor government, has slashed enforcement to the bone, which has meant that an awful lot of the so-called rights, theoretical rights that people have at work, don't exist practically.
Yeah, here.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady will know that what she is putting forward there is simply not the case. Since 2015, the government has doubled the budget for enforcement and compliance with the minimum wage. HMRC's enforcement activity has meant 200,000 workers could access nearly 25 million in national minimum wage arrears in 2018-19. The Employment Agency Standard Inspectorate has received a 50% increase in their frontline inspectors. We're investing over £1 billion in reforming the courts and tribunal service. The Right Honourable Lady is asserting non-facts. I'm giving her the facts. She should listen to those.
Margaret James.
I welcome my Right Honourable friend's commitment to the UK becoming the best place in the world to work and grow a business. Does she agree with me that we need to consider the way that employment protection and the tribunal system impact on those in low-paid and insecure employment in particular?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and she will know that we have consulted on bringing forward proposals on a single enforcement body for employment rights. That consultation closed on the 6th of October, and the government will be responding to that, but she will know very well that this government is committed to extending and improving and enforcing on some of the best workers' rights in the world.
I'm going to call a member who cannot be improved in any way. Alison McGovern.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how much of a favour you did me there, to be honest.
Come on, live up to Berlin.
The truth is that the reality of our labour market today, unfortunately, is the reality that my constituents know, not the picture that we've just heard painted from the dispatch box. But never mind that, Mr. Speaker. This is about Brexit and what it could do to our economy. And the Secretary of State claims the mantle of the person who will defend family rights at work and the ability of people to defend themselves against poor bosses. So will she just clarify for us now? Have the TUC recommended that we accept the government's deal? Yes or no?
Good question.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady will know better than I what the TUC's view is on the government's deal. But she says that the reality is not the same as what I'm saying from the dispatch box. And what I would just like her to recognise, there are almost 32.7 million people more in work now, with 280,000 more in work over the last year. 80% of the jobs since 2010 are full-time, and we have had the fastest growth in real earnings since 2015. The Honourable Lady should listen to the facts and not try to scaremonger. This government is improving workers' rights, we are protecting workers' rights, and we are enhancing enforcement of them.
Michael Fabricant.
Thank you. Anyone who has travelled in the European Union will know that conditions of employment in the UK are higher, particularly on contracts of employment, as well as the other points that my right honourable friend has made. Does she share, therefore, my suspicion that this UQ is not motivated by care for people's and employment rights, but more by the fact that we are facing, possibly, a general election?
Yes. Well, I have to say to my honourable friend, I completely agree, because what I'm hearing from opposition benches does not resemble any of the facts, which are that it is this government, this Conservative government, that is protecting and enhancing rights of the workforce. It is this government that is ensuring a benign economic situation that means more people are in work than ever before, more women in work, fewer young people out of work, rises in wages, and ensuring employment is safer, more secure, and health and safety rules are strong. And it's the opposition that seems to be positioning itself for a general election.
Chris Williamson.
The Secretary of State, if she's serious about making Britain the best place in the world to work, could I suggest that she comes to the dispatch box now and commits to scrapping the anti-trade union legislation, because undermining trade unions over the last 10 years or so has led to an explosion of precarious, low-paid employment, which is now endemic throughout the land.
Well, what the honourable gentleman will be aware of is that in leaving the European Union and with the withdrawal agreement that the Prime Minister has negotiated, it will be the case that if there are any changes to workers' rights, to employment legislation made in the European Union, then there will be the facility for the government to consult with businesses and with trade unions, and for this House to express its own view on any changes and to whether those could or should be considered for implementation in the UK. But what's really important is that it's this House and the United Kingdom's courts that should be able to judge and measure on whether we are sticking to our commitment, as any government, today or a future government, to maintaining the highest standards of workers' rights.
Easy.
Mr. Speaker, one way in which the government could show that it is committed to workers' rights but also innovative in the field of workers' rights is to look carefully at what rights we might extend to workers in the so-called gig economy, the economy that has emerged from the success of tech in the UK. I wonder whether the Secretary of State could update the House on progress in looking at the Taylor report and what her thoughts are on this important area of the economy.
Yes, well, my honourable friend is raising a really important point, and he will be aware that in terms of zero-hours contracts and the gig economy, the number of people on zero-hours contracts is falling, and less than 3% of the people in work are employed on zero-hours contracts. He mentions the Matthew Taylor report. Matthew Taylor himself said banning zero-hours contracts would be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. However, it's important that we do everything we can to ensure that workers have the flexibility that they need. So we've consulted on one-sided flexibility. That consultation closed on the 11th of October, and we will be bringing forward our response soon.
There's no guarantee at all from this government that UK employment rights will keep track with EU employment protections going forward. For example, the gig economy has just been mentioned. The Commission has recently launched proposals to introduce transparent and predictable working conditions for gig economy workers, such as those on zero-hours contract or in domestic employment. It's also planning other additional protections at this moment. So can the Secretary of State promised that that is going to happen here, that we're going to keep in track with the EU developments?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this very important point. She's right that the EU has discussed the gig economy and enhancing the rights of working parents. Now, it is true to say that the EU has brought forward proposals in the Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions Directive, but it's not true to say that these proposals go further than the Good Work Plan. So, for example, we brought forward a statutory instrument in March this year that will make the right to a written statement on day one for every worker come into force in April 2020, whereas under the EU's proposals, if they do bring forward that directive, it won't take effect until the summer of 2022. So the UK is bringing forward workers' rights further and faster than the European Union.
Kevin Olin-Reid.
Prime Minister himself championed the London living wage and a much higher national living wage. Doesn't this demonstrate his commitment to increased workers' rights?
Yeah.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This Prime Minister has been extremely keen to ensure that all workers get a fair deal, and he has presided over the intention to bring the national minimum wage to £10.50 at a greater speed than previously envisaged, and we will be bringing forward measures to ensure that that can be put into force as soon as we can.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The level playing field clause would not constrain any improvement in workers' rights, but it would limit and stop the reduction of workers' rights. So why did the Prime Minister want to see that clause removed from the legally binding withdrawal agreement?
So the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. The EU sets minimum workers' rights, which all EU members abide by, and the UK then, as do many other member states, improves on that, in the UK's case very significantly. So it is the case that under our withdrawal agreement bill and in a no-deal situation, all existing workers' rights will be protected, but what the UK will not be intending to do is to necessarily dynamically align with all future EU legislation. When I say that, this House will have the opportunity to look at all measures that come forward, but the UK in many areas will want to do things better than the European Union. So dynamic alignment means copy and paste. What we don't want to do is to have to do that. And I just gave an example to his honourable friend of an area in which the UK is bringing forward the right to a day one statement much faster than the European Union is doing. That's an example of us wanting to go further and faster in improving workers' rights.
Mr. William Bragg.
The purpose of leaving the European Union is not to have a bonfire of workers' rights, but to make decisions in this House.
Yeah, exactly.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that outside of the EU, it will be this House of Commons that can pass such legislation to improve workers' rights? We should have the confidence to do so and not leave it to others.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Well, my honourable friend is exactly right. It is for this House, it is for the United Kingdom's trade unions, for the United Kingdom's parliamentarians of all parties to be able to preserve and enhance the workforce rights in the United Kingdom for everybody within it in a way that tailors towards the extraordinary opportunities that await us as we leave the European Union.
Melanie On.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I and a number of my colleagues signed EDM 57 in the name of the Honourable Member for Birkenhead as a public indication of support for the withdrawal agreement bill, through which we would have been able to secure some amendments that would give a peace of mind, certainly to colleagues on these benches, hopefully, that workers' rights were not going to be undermined after we leave the EU. Does the Business Secretary share my disappointment that the Prime Minister, rather than bringing the bill through this House, enabling us all to talk about these things and try and get the strongest amendments possible, instead has chosen to pull his own bill?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I have the greatest respect and regard for the Honourable Lady, and I'm sorry to say on this I disagree with her. I think that if Parliament really did intend to give the opportunity for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill to have its third reading and its royal assent, then this House would have also supported the timetable to do it. And unfortunately, the fact that so few colleagues on all sides of the House decided to support the programme motion means that it undermined its own credibility and willingness to bring forward that bill to its conclusion.
Raymond Chishney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State would have seen the report by the European Union, which says 90% of economic growth in the next 15 years will be outside of the European Union, and therefore the United Kingdom has to make decisions in line with its own national interests, which leads to more jobs, opportunity, prosperity and security, which is what we've been seeing the last over 9 years that this Conservative government has been in place.
Well, my honourable friend is exactly right. There is a very bright future that awaits us as we leave the European Union in all circumstances, from the amazing innovations in areas such as healthier, longer living through our life sciences agenda, in areas such as clean growth through our commitment to net zero. There are massive opportunities for new skills, new jobs, new prosperity right across the United Kingdom. And under this Conservative government, it will maintain and enhance workers' rights for all.
Stand up. Stephanie Peacock.
Speaker, as one of the Labour MPs who have worked in good faith to find common ground, compromise even over Brexit, I was disappointed to read those leaked documents. And so I want to ask the Minister, further to the answers that she's given to a number of honourable members here, can the Minister tell us exactly what workplace rights and protections they would introduce to prevent the government from backtracking on the commitments they have already made?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for the Honourable Lady's position, and I can absolutely assure her that it is the government's intention to maintain all of the workers' rights regulations as we leave the European Union, and then to ensure that Parliament has the opportunity in every piece of primary legislation that ever comes forward in the future for Parliament to understand with a statement by government on how that might impact on workers' rights, so that Parliament can express its view, and at the same time that government of the day will consult with trades unions and businesses on whether the impact is positive or negative, and there will be the opportunity either to align with those changes in legislation, to improve on them as the United Kingdom so often does, or if it's not appropriate for the UK, to not implement them. But it should be for this place to make that decision.
Bim Afalami.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that if the Prime Minister's deal negotiated with the European Union is ratified by this House, on leaving the European Union, the United Kingdom will have higher, better, stronger workers' rights than the bare bones provided by the European Union?
Yes, my honourable friend is exactly right.
Gaffney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Tory party talks about protecting workers. Thomas Cook, no say and no pay. Asda, sign or resign. Royal Mail, agreements are made, not been honoured. So where's your intervention from the Tory government? You're further weakening workers' rights after Brexit, including health and safety. So can the Minister tell us why there's no legal protection for existing workers' rights in the withdrawal agreement?
Well, the honourable gentleman is not correct. There are protections for workers' rights in UK legislation, and as I've explained to many honourable and right honourable members, the UK's protections for workers and rights for workers go far beyond any of the EU's minimum standards, and we are proud of that fact, and we have every intention to further enhance those workers' rights as we go forward.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As she rightly pointed out, parties of both sides have expanded workers' rights far beyond EU minimums. So can she go further in calling this campaign out for what it is? It is a grubby attempt to divide employees from employers. It is a deliberate campaign, politically motivated campaign of misinformation. And moreover, it is deeply insulting to the British electorate to suggest that they are incapable of electing people to this place who would share their aims and intentions of wanting to go further in protecting workers' rights.
Yes, my honourable friend is exactly right. It is a great shame that when this House has so much to be proud of in our combined record on workers' rights, that somehow opposition parties are now trying to suggest that the only way to protect workers in the UK is by staying a part of the European Union. That is blatantly untrue. It's blatantly scaremongering. This government has a very proud record of enhancing workers' rights that we look forward to being able to continue once we've left the European Union.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady will know that responsibility for workers' rights is a devolved matter for the Northern Ireland Assembly. She will also know that we have not had a functioning Assembly for almost 3 years. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has been dedicated to the restoration of the Assembly and the Executive. His valiant efforts are now being deliberately, willfully undermined by the Prime Minister's stunt of an early general election. How on earth does the Right Honourable Lady reconcile the efforts of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to have the institutions restored in Northern Ireland and the Prime Minister's stunt of an early general election?
Well, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, is in his place and will have heard what the honourable lady had to say. And of course, it is the case that the parties in Northern Ireland have had ample opportunity to come together. The Prime Minister has sought at every turn, as did his predecessor, to find an accommodation so that all parties in Northern Ireland can reform the Northern Ireland Assembly. It is a top priority for this Parliament, but so too is delivering on the will of the people at the 2016 referendum. It's not acceptable that we have failed yet to deliver on the decision by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union, and we must do so.
Chris Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State's maiden speech contains a passage which, in relation to small business, which says, "I envisage there being absolutely no regulation whatsoever, no minimum wage, no maternity or paternity rights, no unfair dismissal rights, no pension rights." It's no wonder we're suspicious on these benches, Mr. Speaker. So can the Secretary of State tell us if the European Commission provides stronger protections on zero-hour contracts, on childcare provision and on leave issues that are better than the Taylor report, will the UK government match them or will they deviate?
So what I can say to the honourable gentleman is that in each of the areas he's mentioned, the UK already provides enhanced rights to workers. This government is proud of our record in improving workers' rights, and we will continue to seek to do so as we leave the European Union.
Ah, yes. Gareth Snell.
That's very kind of you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Honourable Lady, the Secretary of State, that as a Member of Parliament that voted for second reading, it is either at best confused or at worst slightly disingenuous to put more weight in the programme motion vote than those of us that supported the principle of the bill going forward as a reason for not bringing that bill back.
Yes, indeed.
But could I also ask her, I welcome the ambition that she has, but she will know that under this government, the qualifying period for entitlement to a tribunal fee doubled. Tribunal fees were introduced, and we have seen the Trade Union Act. If the government was serious about making these provisions in law, she would strengthen Clause 31 of the withdrawal bill, make it quite clear there is a clear role for the TUC and not just workers' representatives, and be clear that the comments from my friends from East Barnsley and from Great Grimsby are here to enhance that bill and make it better, and ultimately give this House a chance to vote on it.
Well, I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for his personal efforts to seek to support the resolution of committing to the will of the people at the 2016 referendum. And I know it's been difficult for him personally. I sincerely pay tribute to him. What I would say to him is that in the Good Work Plan commitments, the government is committed to taking forward 51 of Matthew Taylor's 53 recommendations, including making improvements to the clarity of employment status checks, to bringing forward proposals on a single enforcement body for employment rights, to introducing a right to request a more predictable contract, and of course we've introduced a tipping bill to ensure that employees get the tips that they have hard earned and that they deserve to receive. So I think at every level this government shows its desire and willingness to enhance the rights of workers. And to his specific point about trades unions, we've committed that when in future, to any future government, there is a new bill that affects employees' rights, that the government of the day will be required to consult with businesses and trades unions, as well as in this place, on Parliament's view of whether that should be reciprocated in UK law.
Sam Jima.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State's words ring hollow simply because the workers' rights were in the legally binding withdrawal agreement and now have been moved into the political declaration. But the other reason for which her reassurances ring hollow is that the logic of leaving the EU to look for new trade deals is that whatever we want will come at a price of what another country wants. And the desire for a US trade deal as a political trophy would mean that workers' rights could end up being traded away to get that US trade deal. Can the Secretary of State assure us that that will not happen in pursuit of a US trade deal if the Prime Minister's deal were to happen?
Well, frankly, Mr. Speaker, of all people, I find the Honourable Gentleman's intervention in this area quite shameful. He will be very aware of the government's proud record of enhancing workers' rights. And of course, he will also be very well aware, as an ex-Conservative minister, of the fact that this government is committed to ensuring not only the protection of workers, but also the enhancement of their rights. And it is disingenuous to suggest otherwise.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand what the Secretary of State is saying about new legislation brought forward by the EU, but of course it is also the case that existing rules from the EU are not static. They can be interpreted and changed, for example, by European Court of Justice judgments. Now, in that situation, if the ECJ do interpret an existing employment right in a way that's favourable to the employee, will this government legislate to enhance that in UK law as well?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point, and as I've tried to explain to other honourable and right honourable members, what the UK government will do is, wherever there is a new piece of EU legislation that is brought into force, there will be the UK government of the day will provide a report to this House so that this House is able to provide its opinion on whether that impact enhances, reduces, changes in some way workers' rights. And there will also be, when a bill is brought forward in this place that affects employees' rights, the requirement to consult with businesses and trades unions on any impact on workers' rights, for better or for worse. So it'll be for this House to decide what gets taken forward.
Ruth Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has repeatedly discussed pay inflation during this answer. The West Midlands TUC have today published pay level analysis. My constituents are currently experiencing the worst pay squeeze in 200 years, still earning less in real terms than in 2008. We can't trust you on pay, so how can we trust you to deliver the workers' rights that I, with honourable members, have been trying to deliver with you as part of the WAB?
Well, again, I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for her efforts to get the withdrawal agreement bill through this House. However, I must disagree with her. It is this government that is committing to raising the national minimum wage to £10.50. We introduced the national living wage. Our changes to the tax-free allowance has taken millions of people out of paying tax altogether, and real wages are rising at their fastest levels since 2015. There has been real increases in take-home pay for millions of workers, absolutely vital, and this government will always do everything we can to retain and enhance the rights for workers.
I don't think we do.
Jim Shannon.
Can the business...
I called the wrong Jim. No disrespect to the honourable gentleman. I should have called Jim Cunningham. I will. I mean, I say to the honourable gentleman from Strangford, you're a very great man, sir. But I was originally going to call Mr. Cunningham. We'll come to you. Don't worry.
I'm saving you up.
I'm saving you up. Jim Cunningham.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Secretary of State, we've now got a situation under this government who have actually got the working poor. And if we really want to know what this government's intentions are regarding workers' rights, all you've got to look at is the trade union bill that one of our colleagues tried to put through here last year. So what value or credibility can you give to any commitments by the government on workers' rights?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman talks about the plight of workers, and he will understand that in fact there are now nearly 33 million people in work, with an increase of 280,000 more people in work since last year, and 80% of jobs since 2010 are full-time jobs, and real wages are rising. These are very important measures, and the government has committed to increasing the national living wage to £10.50 an hour, all incredibly important steps to give workers better rights and better conditions.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very great man.
I give way to youth and every occasion. Can the Business Secretary confirm the right of NHS staff who are skilled but don't meet the highly skilled threshold?
Two of my favourite gyms in the world that you just called, one after the other. And to the Honourable Gentleman's question, it is absolutely the case that the UK will always ensure that the immigration system is fair to the United Kingdom's needs for skilled workforce, but also fair to those around the world who would like to come here to contribute to our economy and to our fantastic NHS.
Liz McInnes.
Mr. Speaker, to see this government's real attitude to workers' rights, we only need to look at the treatment of the Interserve workers at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. These cooks, cleaners and porters have been engaged in a long-standing dispute over terms, conditions and pay, and over the recognition of their trade union, the PCS. The Secretary of State earlier talked about strong trade unions, yet the Foreign and Commonwealth Office won't recognise the PCS. So if this government really is serious about workers' rights, why have they allowed this dispute to run and run?
Well, I'm sure the Honourable Lady will be delighted to know that in my own department, in Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, that there has been a dispute resolution, and it's obviously very important that always trade unions do represent the workforce, but at the same time that there are respectful on all sides discussions taking place, which I know is the case right across Whitehall.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard lots of words today from the dispatch box, but on workers' rights, isn't it the case that the British public don't trust a word the Tories say?
Yeah.
And furthermore, isn't it the case that the government wishes to use this deal to dispose of all of those hard-won workers' rights on the bonfire of a harsh Tory Brexit?
I'm afraid the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely wrong. The UK has gone beyond the EU minimum standards in so many areas, including maternity entitlements, leave and pay for the other parent, shared parental leave, minimum holiday rights, the national minimum wage, and in fact one of the EU's own agencies, Eurofound, ranks the UK as the second best country in the EU for workplace well-being, something that this government is extremely proud of.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the United States, employment contracts are at will. There's no right to union representation. There is 2 weeks holiday pay entitlement, no maternity rights, and no entitlement to sick pay. Think of that. Isn't it the case that the reason that for not making alignment with the European Union legally binding is to align more closely with the United States?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that what she has just said is absolutely not the case. The EU minimum standard is 20 days paid holiday. The UK is 28. There is no minimum wage in the EU. In the UK, we're moving to £10.50. We are introducing a day one right for all employees for transparency on their employment entitlements. The UK already far exceeds the EU's minimum standards, and there is no way that in a free trade deal the United Kingdom will need to or will agree to give anything away that we do not think is in the interests of UK's workers. And this government is committed to making the UK the best place in the world to work.
The European standards are one thing, but actually another aspect of European Union law is that once Member States have established enhancements, they cannot roll back from those enhancements. So why did the government seek the exemptions from compulsory arbitration if it wasn't intending to dilute those very standards that are enhanced to seek a trade deal with the United States?
Yes. Good.
Well, I'm tempted to just refer the honourable gentleman to what I've just said to his honourable friend. The United Kingdom far exceeds EU standards for workers' rights. It is our intention to further enhance those. But what we are saying here is that it is for this place, for the trades unions in the United Kingdom, for businesses in the United Kingdom, and for this Parliament to be able to decide on those enhancements to workers' rights once we've left the European Union.
Thank you. Order. Point of order. Point of order, Mrs. Maria Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House of Commons could well agree to an early general election today, with Parliament dissolving on Monday, which is the day scheduled for the election of your successor, Mr. Speaker. If a general election is called, many members could be quite understandably detained in their constituencies on Monday. So to preserve the dignity of this place and also the importance of the election, Mr. Speaker, could I call upon you to consider continuing in your position for the next 2 working days to ensure that you leave this place in the way that you would want to?
I will respond to the right honourable lady, but I'll take the point of order from the honourable gentleman first. A point of order, James Gray.
On point of order, Mr. Speaker, further to that point of order, the whole House will, I know, want to mark, and I almost said to celebrate, your departure from this place after 10 highly distinguished years in your seat. But would it not be a shame if the transition to the new Speaker were marked by anything less than entirely seemly procedure? And if, for example, a new Speaker were to be elected on Monday the 4th, the House would then to dissolve on Tuesday the 5th, and let's imagine that, for example, that new Speaker were then not to be elected by the other party standing against him in his or her constituency, you'd then have the position of a Speaker having stood sat in your chair rather for 1 day, which would be a great deal less than seemly. There are also a number of other reasons to do with pensions and other things as to why that should not be allowed. Is it not, therefore, a strong argument, Mr. Speaker, that would say that you should be very kindly asked to extend your stay in the chair for now a couple of days, only until next Monday, and that therefore there will be an election of a new Speaker when the new Parliament reassembles?
I'm going to take the honourable. We don't want to have a great spate of points of order. The point has been made with great clarity and courtesy by the right honourable lady. If the honourable gentleman really thinks he's got anything to add, I'll come to him in a moment. Okay, no, not yet. Not yet. I'm keeping him waiting because somebody else signalled before the honourable gentleman did. But I thank the member for North Wiltshire. Point of order, Chris Bryant.
I think everybody knows my own personal ambitions in this regard. But being very serious, it's perfectly possible that Parliament will prorogue on Thursday evening, or it might prorogue on Monday or Tuesday next week. If we were to prorogue on Thursday evening, then there wouldn't be a speakership election next Monday at all. As I understand it, if it's the December the 12th general election, then the 25 days before that means that dissolution would be next Wednesday. So we might still be sitting on Monday and Tuesday. If I'm honest, as a candidate, it just seems odd for the House to be focusing on a speakership election when we should be focusing on the concerns of the nation. So, as a candidate, I would gently say that it would be good to get this resolved as soon as possible. I think it would be daft for us to have a speakership election before the general election.
So, of course, point of order, Michael Fabricant.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a contrary view, and I'll tell you why, if I may. And you and I have discussed this, actually, some months ago. I have very stark memories of being a new Member of Parliament. And when we voted... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we voted as the new members of Parliament, we just voted on party lines. We didn't know the individuals involved. And I just believe it's right that members of Parliament should have the choice of different candidates for Speaker whom we know. And I think there's a possibility of a large churn at the next general election with new members of Parliament who actually won't have a clue about the individual candidates, will simply vote on party lines, and I don't think that's right for Parliament.
Yes, of course. Point of order, Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, and it's further to the previous point of order. I actually agree with the honourable member, because when I came in 1992 as a new member, the first thing I did was to vote for a Speaker, and without knowing any of the candidates in any detail whatsoever. But surely the best way to resolve this issue is not to have a general election in December.
Well, we've now had points of order from the members for Basingstoke, North Wiltshire, Rhondda, Lichfield and Ilford South. My response is as follows, and I hope it will be taken in the constructive spirit in which it's intended. This is first and foremost in terms of opinion, and opinion guides and informs us in everything here, not a matter for the chair. It is in the first instance, I think, very properly a matter for the candidates for the chair. I think that's a material factor if there is a consensus amongst them, and if I may say so, for the usual channels. I have been apprised of this matter only within the last hour, and I've had the briefest of exchanges with the Leader of the House about it. I think that there is merit in hearing the views of the candidates, not in the chamber, and the views of the usual channels. I hope I can be forgiven, not least in response to the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Basingstoke, who made her point with great courtesy, for saying this. I made my announcement on September the 9th, and I meant it. I have not the slightest ambition to serve any longer than the close of business on Thursday. Having been a member of this place 22 years and Speaker as 10, I will do my duty. And if the House asks me to do as people have requested, of course I take that extremely seriously, and as close to being an instruction as makes no difference. But I don't think that it should be resolved here and now. I hope I've given an earnest of my good intentions, and let's see if we can resolve this matter in a courteous and constructive way within the coming hours, and certainly within 24 hours. I hope that's helpful. And can I thank members for what they've said and for the way in which they've said it. I think there would be a division on that, and I think that the Honourable Lady would be in isolation in the division lobby. 4 more years, she said. Meanwhile, but anyway, I'm glad the House is in a good mood at this time of day. Presentation of bill, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. A minister nods, a very good nod, if I may say so.
Northern Ireland Budget Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, thank you. Presentation of bill, the Prime Minister.
Or a whip on duty.
Or a whip on duty, another very good nod.
Early Parliamentary General Election Bill.
Second reading what day?
Today.
Thank you. Early Parliamentary General Election Bill, business of the House motion. I should inform the House that I have selected an amendment in the name of Stella Creasy. In a moment, I will ask the Leader of the House to move the business of the House motion. I simply want to emphasise to the House that the vote on second reading of the bill must come no more than 4 hours after the start of proceedings on the business of the House motion. There is an amendment to it, as I've just said, which I have selected, and of course colleagues are free to debate the motion and the amendment. May I gently encourage and exhort the House not to exhaust itself in so doing, because the deadline for the vote on second reading is as I have described, and I can inform the House that several colleagues wish to speak on the substance of the bill. Moreover, gentle hint, the business of the House motion is potentially subject to a closure motion after a reasonable period of debate. I hope that that is helpful to the House. I beg to move the business of the House motion. Indeed, the leader, insofar as he begs at all, is, I believe, begging to move. The Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I do indeed, Mr. Speaker, beg to move the motion standing in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. I'm sure that honourable members will appreciate that I do not wish to detain the House unduly. I hope that the House will support this business of the House motion in order that we can move on to consider the stages of this bill. This is a straightforward business of the House motion that will facilitate consideration of a short bill in order that the House can agree the date of a general election. The motion sets aside up to 6 hours for consideration of the bill, including up to 4 hours for the second reading, with the remaining time for committee of the whole House and remaining stages. In order to have a pre-Christmas election on the 12th of December, this bill will need royal assent by the 5th of November for the House to dissolve just after midnight on the 6th of November. That general election timetable allows for the Northern Ireland Budget Bill to pass before dissolution to ensure the Northern Ireland Civil Service can access the funding it needs to deliver public services and proper governance. The situation facing a number of Northern Ireland departments has become critical, and the bill is needed to allow the Northern Ireland Civil Service to continue to access the cash needed to deliver public services. In order to ensure that that bill receives royal assent to allow for dissolution on the 6th of November and to allow the 25 working days for the administration of the poll, it needs to proceed quickly. We have therefore proposed in the business motion that all common stages of the bill happen today. The bill that is before the House is only 2 clauses long, so is a very short bill. It is also a simple bill in that it seeks only to set the polling day as the 12th of December. The House should not therefore be disadvantaged by considering all stages of the bill in one day. Turning to the honourable member for Walthamstow's amendment, the government's business motion provides for an efficient timetable for the consideration of this bill, which is a straightforward piece of legislation for an election on the 12th of December. Of course, the government recognises that the selection of amendments is a matter for the Speaker or the Chairman of Ways and Means. However, it is entirely standard practice for this House for amendments not to be taken from backbench MPs on bills as simple as this one, where an expedited timetable is required. While it may not be a wrecking amendment in itself, there is no doubt that it is a gateway to amendments that could seek to obstruct the bill. The bill is simply designed to give effect to what all four of the biggest parties in this House have now said they support. That is a December general election. Nothing more and nothing less. We will have over 6 weeks. I will, of course, give way to the honourable lady.
I'm most grateful to the Leader of the House, who once upon a time was a champion of this House, but since he became leader, seems to be trying to curtail debate on every government bill. I know he's had a long-running, if polite, dispute with the Speaker, but could he explain to us paragraph 3B and why he felt it was necessary to say the Speaker shall leave the chair whether or not notice of an instruction has been given? The Speaker is never in the chair when we're in committee stage. Why does the Leader of the House feel it's necessary to say that this afternoon?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady and I served on the Procedure Committee together. And the honourable lady must be aware that that is completely standard whenever the Speaker leaves the chair to go into committee. It has been standard for decades, if not for centuries. There is nothing unusual in that. And if anyone thinks, Mr. Speaker, that in any way it is a dig at you, they simply don't understand the procedures of this House. And I notice the Speaker is indicating that he is in assent with what I'm saying. So I'm frankly surprised the honourable lady, who is a distinguished member of the Procedure Committee, isn't aware of that basic procedure. So it is just a December general election, nothing more and nothing less. There will be 6 weeks to discuss all of the great political questions facing our country before the people are given the chance to give their verdict. But the debate today is not about those great issues. It is simply about setting the 12th of December as the date for a general election.
That's not what this provision is about.
No, indeed. The question is the early parliamentary general election bill, business of the House motion, as on the order paper. The Shadow Leader of the House, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for this motion. Mr. Speaker, this House is surprised and alarmed at the state of the government and for moving a motion for a general election in this way. The Leader of the House said yesterday that the bill would be published this morning. It was a great disservice to the House that the bill wasn't available yesterday. It's just one line, and we are now debating a programme motion to introduce a bill in one day. The government yesterday voted for the Fixed Term Parliament Act because they did not have a majority, as they did not get the magic 434, two-thirds of the majority in the House. So they're introducing another bill. So can I ask the Leader of the House, will the government now repeal the Fixed Term Parliament Act? Mr. Speaker, this bill will be pushed through in one day and back from the Lords again. He criticised the EU withdrawal agreement 1 and 2, which had very similar, very small, few clauses, and now the Leader and the government is doing exactly the same. As you stated, Mr. Speaker, the whole process will take 6 hours, with the second reading vote coming 4 hours after the start of proceedings with one amendment. Mr. Speaker, I think this is another way of crashing out of the EU without a deal, because they haven't met their target of the 31st of October. This programme motion is unacceptable and is deliberately designed to avoid scrutiny on the government. And speaking of programme motions, the WAB bill is in limbo, in purgatory, in the ether, when this House was asking for a proper programme motion on the bill, which would have enabled honourable members to have a proper discussion, to discuss, debate and amend when necessary. The government did not want to give us that time, did not want to deal with it, leaving the EU in an orderly way for businesses, farmers, working people and the environment. Now, he'll know that the Honourable Member for Cheltenham yesterday said, surely the proportionate and sensible thing to do is to offer the House more time. If it does not vote for it, the government will take their course, but surely they should at least try. And the Leader of the House made it clear yesterday in his response to the Honourable Member for Aylesbury he had no intention of bringing the withdrawal agreement back to the House. Why? Why can we not have a proper debate on the withdrawal agreement bill with a new programme motion where amendments are tested in a vote, and then we can see where the House stands on this issue? I will.
Most grateful, Shadow Leader, for giving way. Would you cast a mind back to the second reading debate of the withdrawal agreement bill, when she will recall Labour ran out of speakers some 1 hour before the end of the debate? Why, therefore, does she need more time?
Good point.
Thank you, Mr. If the honourable gentleman will have listened to what I've said previously, we need more time to amend the bill so that everyone's views could be taken into account, that we didn't have an opportunity to amend the bill or even vote on the bill. We have tried to have discussions, but the government was not listening. Yesterday, in response to the Honourable Member for North Dorset, the Leader of the House said the reason for not bringing forward an allocation of time motion is that the House has made its mind clear. It does not want to deal or engage seriously with the withdrawal agreement bill. How did he know? I think this is highly patronising. We have been begging for extra time so we could have the votes, so it's clear what the House's view is. The reason why the bill needed further discussion, as he knows, is there will be a border down the Irish Sea. That was the reason the previous Prime Minister ruled this out. Or it would result in the breakup of the United Kingdom. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Leader should do the right thing by the House, reintroduce the WAB bill with a new programme motion, which could be agreed with the usual channels, which takes into account all sides of the debate and would help the country move on.
The honourable lady completed her speech. She has, indeed. Mr. Beat Wishart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for bringing forward this very interesting business motion this afternoon. And here we are once again considering another programme motion. I'm pretty certain the government are full and sick of these cursed things, and who knows, after listening to the Shadow Leader's contribution there, we might be heading for meaningful programme motion too, because I was beginning to sense that the Labour Party look like they're about to oppose this business motion, this programme motion, which might indeed mean that this will not progress. So my message to everybody is, if you're intending to get your Brexmas decorations out, perhaps just wait a moment until this is going to be concluded. Mr. Speaker, we could have had all this done and dusted. October could have been when we had all this settled, and the Commons could have been reassembling right now to get on with the business that our constituents think is important. But the Prime Minister's bluff and bluster has brought us here to a deadlocked Parliament, a broken Britain, and the spectre of their hard Brexit still looming over us. But now there's a few things that we do know as we consider this programme motion just now. They won't get their no deal, which is good. He won't be able to bring back his withdrawal agreement until the British people have had their say. But probably most importantly, he has failed to get the United Kingdom out of the European Union on Thursday. Remember, do or die. No ifs, no buts. Die in a ditch. This was the very basis of his Tory leadership campaign, his solemn pledge to his party. The Kippers, the Farages and the right-wing Tories must feel like total mugs today, because he has not delivered and he will soon be judged. Now, the date on this bill, Mr. Speaker, is the 12th of December, and we all know that a poll in December is less than ideal. In my constituency, for example, it gets dark about 3:30 in some of the Highland parts of my constituency. It's probably worse for some of my other colleagues. But it's worth that risk in order that we remove this Prime Minister. But calling an election by driving through a bill in just one day is also less than ideal. 6 hours to consider all of these details. And using a programme motion to clamp down on any kind of amendments is absolutely objectionable. And that is why we will be supporting the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow in her amendment today. And, Mr. Speaker, it's never been the practice of the Scottish National Party to vote with the Tories in this House on programme motions. And we won't be supporting them on this today, but we will not be standing in the way of this bill. We will not vote with the Tories on this programme motion, but we will back the general election that this country definitely needs to break the Brexit deadlock and make Scotland's voice heard loud and clear. Give way to Honourable Leader.
If the honourable gentleman knows where his partner, the leader for the Liberal Democrats, is in this debate, because she hasn't bothered to turn up, and I thought it was something they'd agreed together.
I sort of say to the Honourable Lady in all gentle candour, to categorise the Liberal Democrats as the Scottish National Party's partner couldn't be further from the truth. We are delighted that they've come along with us in order to try and promote and progress this agenda. And then sometimes the Liberal Democrats do have their values and uses, though it's not very often, I would say, to the Honourable Lady. So the challenge for this government is to get the numbers, for this programme motion, and it's really up to the rest of the parties to decide what they are going to do today. But the message from the Scottish National Party is that we want no part of their shambolic Brexit, and we want the right to decide our own future in Scotland. We will do our bit. We will take on the Tories and we will beat them in Scotland. It's up to the other parties to come, to have the courage and have the self-belief that they can beat the Tories. We will be back in even greater numbers in this House following this election, and we will continue to progress our nation's independence and the demand that it is Scotland's right to choose its future it wants based on the decisions of the Scottish people.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I rise to move Amendment C to the programme motion because Amendment C is about ensuring whatever happens today, the House can know it was fair play. Mr. Speaker, last night the Leader of the House told this place that whilst we couldn't see the bill before today, we could see the programme motion. A whole one copy was made available in the tabling office after 10 p.m. last night. When looking at it, it showed what the government was trying to do, in simple terms, was rig today's debate. They've done that by removing the part of the standard orders of this House which allows the Chair of Proceedings the right to select any amendment, new clause or new schedule for vote. To do that late at night, without any consultation with the opposition, and in the hope that nobody notices is, frankly, and I hope the Leader of the House understands this concept, not cricket. It is to admit that rather than win the case for this bill, as it stands, the Executive wants no challenge to it at all. And that, whether you think this is a good bill or not, should be a concern for all of us in this House. Because if we let this lie on this, it will become standard practice in the future. Now, this is not the first time that the government, when backed into a corner, has tried such a measure. It did this also on the 24th of October last year with legislation on Northern Ireland. Thankfully, then, the government saw sense and agreed to restore it, which is what Amendment C will do. It doesn't amend the bill itself. It doesn't encourage any particular selection to be made. It simply puts back the concept of fair play in this House by restoring our standing orders as they would be for any other piece of legislation. And in doing so, it repairs both our rule book and, frankly, our reputation. Because letting this programme motion go through without the full list of rules is like letting Lance Armstrong keep his medals, Maradona benefit from the hand of God, and accepting Major Ingram as a winner of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Yes, she knows that. That's the point.
And that reaction is the point in
Exactly. Exactly.
You love a cheat.
You love a cheat.
You love a cheat and a liar. Let us not confirm the reputation the public already think we have of people trying to do backroom deals and cheat and lie. Whatever you think of this legislation, let it be won by fair play today. Let's use the rule book we've always been used for and include Amendment C in this programme.
Order. The original question was as on the order paper. Since when the amendment has been proposed, the question is that the amendment be made. It appears that there are no other speakers. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Thangham Debonair and Chris Elmore. Tellers for the noes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart.